Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to PMP Live. My name is Leah. I'm one of the kids and teen booksellers who will have the pleasure of hosting you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us in this new format where we continue to bring authors and their new books to the politics and prose community. As this is a new adventure, please bear with us as we work out all the kinks and get more comfortable with this new platform. So before we begin, just a few things. You can click on this green button that's right here where you can buy the book at our PNP website, where we actually have free shipping until April 15th. And also, you can use this Ask a Question button over here at any time during the event, where you can ask a question that we're going to answer later in this discussion. You can also upvote if you see somebody else's question and you're like, I really want to get to it. So we can highlight those. So, and also, unlike our in-person events, our speaker and other audience members can't see you through the screen, so feel empowered to stay in your comfy clothes without judgment and enjoy. So, on to tonight's event. It is my pleasure to introduce Robin Talley, best-selling master of queer historical fiction. Her books explore personal journeys of self-acceptance while also highlighting moments of resistance and the demand for equality and freedom of expression. Her books have won various honors, including the Amnesty CILIP honor and the Concord Book Award, as well as being shortlisted for the Lambda Literary Award and the CILIP Carnegie Medal. She has now written 6 YA novels, including Lies We Tell Ourselves, Our Own Private Universe, Pulp, and her newest one, Music from Another World, whose book birthday we're celebrating today. So, prior to committing full-time to her writing, Robin worked in digital communications for LGBTQ plus rights, women's rights, educational equity, and other progressive causes. She's also a local author residing in DC, and she grew up in Southwest Virginia. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring you Robin Talley to your screens.
Thanks so much, Leah. This is really exciting. I love being here with you all in this new format is really exciting. Being here with Politics and Prose is especially exciting. This event was supposed to be in person with Politics and Prose, and I've done a couple of other events there. And so when I originally scheduled this event, I was envisioning, being downstairs in like the children's and teen area of the main store, where I've done things before, and where I've been to plenty of other author events before. I was actually just there last month. It feels like a million years ago, but it was last month, doing an event with Eric Smith, an in-conversation event for his book, Don't Read the Comments. And I remember saying, in about 6 weeks, I'll be back here to do my launch for Music from Another World. But here we are in this new format. So, but anyway, it's wonderful to be able to be here with you and to be able to be out with people from outside of DC who are able to join. So I'm so glad to see so many people here, even though I can't actually see you, which is too bad. I can sort of see your names in a list, but I wish I could see you all. But it's wonderful, Politics and Prose, to offer this new event in this new format. And by the way, Leah mentioned, but I'll mention again, please do, if you're going to buy Music from Another World, which hopefully you'll want to after, we've been talking about it, but please do buy it from Politics and Prose. There's a button for me. It's right here below my face. I'm not sure where it is on your screens. But if you buy it from them, again, as Leah said, they'll ship it for free. So you absolutely might as well buy it from them as opposed to some sort of online mega retailer. Because right now we absolutely, desperately need to be supporting local small businesses, especially independent bookstores like Politics and Prose, which is such a huge part of the DC community. We need to be doing everything we can for them. But anyway, so really excited to be here with you all. And I am here to talk about my new book, Music from Another World. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a reading from it of just the beginning of the book, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why I wrote it and how I came to think about it and some of the research that I did for it. And then I will take questions that you have. So please do ask questions. Like, again, for me, the button is right below my face that says ask a question. And just type in, because I have talked to so few people in the past few weeks that I would love to hear any thoughts that you might have. Feel free to ask about this book or any of my other books or anything else you might want to talk about. But so, Music from Another World is historical fiction. I've written a few historical fiction books now. This one is set in the late 1970s in California, in San Francisco and in Orange County, and which was a very key moment in the history of the gay rights movement. And it follows two girls who get caught up in everything that's going on at that time. And it's told in the format of diary entries and letters. The two main characters wind up being pen pals. And so it's them writing back and forth to each other and also writing in their diaries. So I'm going to read just the beginning of it to you, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it after that. So the beginning is actually the letter where they start the pen pal program. So Wednesday, June 1st, 1977, introducing the California Pen Pal Project. Dear girls, welcome to the first annual California Pen Pal Project. Over the next 5 months, this project will foster exciting new friendships and strengthen the faith of the incoming junior girls at New Way Christian Academy and the Holy Angels Catholic School. At the bottom of this letter are the names of one girl from each school. To earn credit for this assignment, you must write at least 2 letters each month to your assigned pen pal and complete a final report by the end of the first term in November. You should answer at least one of the following questions in each letter and include summaries of your pen pal's responses in your final report. Pen pal questions. Number 1. Describe yourself using 3 adjectives. Number 2, who are the members of your family? Number 3, what are your favorite hobbies? Number 4, what is your favorite television program? Number 5, how do you plan to maintain your strong Christian morality this summer despite the temptations of modern society? Number 6, what is your favorite Bible story and why? Number 7, do you have any interesting activities planned for this summer? Number 8, what is it like living in your part of California? Number 9, what is your favorite subject in school and why? And number 10, how can you and your new pen pal support each other in your spiritual challenges as you transition into your final years of high school and the new lives that await you after graduation? Pen pal pairing, Tammy Larson of New Way Christian Academy in Ocean Valley, California, and Sharon Hawkins of Holy Angels Catholic School in San Francisco, California. Now I'm going to read the very first letter that comes after that. And this is not a pen pal letter, actually, this is a diary entry. This is Tammy writing in her diary. So Tuesday, June 7th, 1977. Dear Harvey, I hope it's okay for me to call you Harvey. In school, when they taught us to write letters, they said adults should always be addressed as Mr. or Mrs. But from what I've read in the newspaper, you don't seem much like the adults I know. I'd feel wrong calling you Mr. Milk. Besides, it's not as if I'm ever going to send you this letter. I've never kept a diary before, but things have been getting harder lately, and tonight might be the hardest night of all. I need someone I can talk to, even if you can't answer back. Plus, I told Aunt Mandy I couldn't join the prayer circle because I had too much homework. Tomorrow's the last day of school, so I don't actually have any homework, but she doesn't know that. If I keep writing this notebook, maybe she'll think homework is really what I'm doing. I guess I could write to my new pen pal instead. That might count as homework. It'd be closer than writing a fake letter to a famous San Francisco homosexual anyway, but I can't handle the thought of writing to some stranger right now. Technically, you're a stranger too, Harvey, but you don't feel like one. That's why I wanted to write to you instead of a Dear Diary or something. It's ironic, though, that my new pen pal lives in San Francisco too. I wonder if he's ever met you. How big is the city anyway? I read a magazine article that said gay people could hold hands walking down the street there, and no one minds. Is that true? The prayer circle's starting over. Brett and Carolyn are leading the Lord's Prayer again. It's probably the only prayer they know. We've been cooped up in the church basement for 5 hours now. My whole family, plus the youth group, plus a bunch of the other Protect Our Children volunteers. Along with Aunt Mandy and Uncle Russell, of course. The results from Miami should come in any minute. You probably already know this. Wait, who am I kidding? Of course you know, Harvey. But there was a vote today in Florida. They were voting on homosexuality, so our church, New Way Baptist, was heavily involved, even though we're on the opposite side of the country. I worked in the office Aunt Mandy and Uncle Russell set up in the den, answering phones and putting together mailings and counting donations to the New Way Protect Our Children Fund. We had bake sales and car washes to raise money to send to Anita Bryant, too. You know all about Anita Bryant, obviously. You're probably just as scared of her as I am. Although, come to think of it, whenever I see you in the newspaper, you're always smiling in the pictures. You look the opposite of afraid. Don't you get anxious having everyone know? I'm terrified all the time, and no one even knows about me yet. I hope they never find out. Maybe I should pray for that. Ha. Okay, the Lord's Prayer is over, and now Uncle Russell's making everyone silently call on God to save good Christians of Florida from sin. I hope I can keep writing without getting in trouble. Look at them all showing off how devout they are. The only two people in this room who aren't clasping their hands in front of them and moving their lips dramatically are me and Aunt Mandy. That's because I'm a grievous sinner, obviously, and Aunt Mandy keeps peeking out from her shut eyes at the phone next to her. I'm not sure how much you can concentrate on God when you're solely focused on being ready to snatch up the receiver the second it starts to shake. Maybe she'll grab it so hard, it'll crush to a pulp in her fist like one of Anita Bryant's fucking Florida oranges. I wonder what you're doing tonight, Harvey. Probably waiting by your phone, too. Only you're in San Francisco, and if you're praying for the opposite of what Aunt Mandy and everyone in my church basement is praying for. It seems pointless to pray now, though. The votes have already been cast, so we're just waiting to hear the results. There's a reporter from my aunt and uncle's favorite radio station in LA, sitting at the back of the room, ready to interview Uncle Russell once we know what happened. Even though we basically already do. My mom showed up at church tonight with a box of balloons from the supermarket. But Aunt Mandy wouldn't let anyone touch them until the announcement, so at the moment the box is sitting in the closet under a stack of old communion trays. The second that phone starts to ring, though, I just bet Aunt Mandy's going to haul out that box and make us all start blowing up those crappy balloons. I wonder if you've heard of my aunt. She wants you to. She knows exactly who you are, of course. You're her enemy. Which makes me your enemy too, I guess. I'm not 18, and it's not as if I could have voted in an election in Miami even if I were 18, but I've still spent the past 2 months folding up comic books about the destruction of Sodom to mail out to churches in Florida. I'm a soldier for Christ. That's what Aunt Mandy calls me anyway. Since I do everything she says, she must be right. Writing to you instead of praying with the others is the closest I've ever come to rebelling. That's how much of a coward I am, Harvey. I wish I had the nerve to tell my aunt to go shove it. That's what I'd really pray for. The nerve, I mean. If I thought prayer ever helped anything. Shit, the phone's ringing. More later. Tammy. All right, so that's how this book starts out. After that section, it goes on to, it alternates letters between Tammy and Sharon, her pen pal, who's in San Francisco. So this book, obviously it's historical fiction. And I've written a historical fiction a few times before. I sort of alternate between writing historical and contemporary stories. And whenever I set out to write historical, I try to think about an era that I find really, really interesting and that I want to know more about. And so the late 1970s has always been an era that I've been really, really interested in. Because it was sort of this combination of factors that were all going on at the same time. It was the beginning of the political part of the gay rights movement in the United States. And at the same time, it was also sort of the beginning of the anti-gay rights political movement in the United States. Obviously, neither one of those things was brand new. Neither one was invented in 1977 or anything. There was obviously Stonewall was 1969, and there were other big gay rights protests before and after that. But the late 70s is when it became sort of a semi-mainstream political movement as opposed to counterculture. And so it's interesting to look at how those two things sort of rose up and connected together. Because on the one hand, you had Harvey Milk, who, for anyone who might not be familiar, which unfortunately I know is the case because if you're some people who are younger haven't been taught about that era in school because it's not taught when it should be. But Harvey Milk was a very, very prominent, perhaps the most prominent gay rights activist at this time. And he was a major figure in San Francisco, but he was also known nationally. So on the one hand, you had activists like him who were really taking major strides forward for equality for gay people. And by the way, I'm saying gay and not LGBT throughout most of this discussion because in this time, the laws were pretty much did not take into account bisexual or transgender people. So there was no LGBT acronym in any meaningful way. And they didn't even really take into account queer women very much. It was mostly in the public consciousness of straight people. It was gay meant gay men, usually white cisgender gay men, to be more specific. But so there were a number of gay rights activists who were getting more and more attention. At the same time, there were also anti-gay rights activists that were starting to get power and starting to use power in a way they never had before. From the most prominent was Anita Bryant. So both Harvey and Anita Bryant got mentioned in the section that I read because they were both household names at the time. Most people have forgotten who Anita Bryant was, if they ever knew now, but she was really well known at the time. She was sort of a cross between Anne Hathaway and Ann Coulter, is sort of how I'm thinking of her, because she started out as America's sweetheart. People really knew her as a singer, and she had been a runner-up for Miss America, and she also did a lot of commercials in a time when people actually sat and watched commercials because you couldn't avoid it. It was on network TV. And so she was really known as this spokesperson, especially for Florida orange juice. And that was how she was known. And then all of a sudden she started, someone told her that gay people were starting to get rights, and she got really upset. And she was suddenly on the news all the time talking about the evils of militant homosexuality. And she started leading a political campaign to overturn. There had been a couple of gay rights laws that had been passed in a couple of cities, one of which was Miami. And she started leading a campaign with a lot of her followers to get these laws overturned. And so the section, the diary entry that I just read from Tammy takes place the night of what turned out to be Anita Bryant's first major victory, June 7th, 1977, later became known as Orange Tuesday in some circles. Anita Bryant's campaign to get the gay rights law in Miami overturned was victorious. There was a ballot initiative, and voters in Miami voted to overturn the gay rights law. And it led to, it was a huge success for her and her followers, and so they started trying to do the same thing in other cities and other states. But it also really rallied the gay rights activists who realized exactly what they were up against. And so it really strengthened both the pro-gay rights and anti-gay rights movements at the same time, which is fascinating. And that continued, their influence continued for the next couple of years. And so I really thought this was an interesting time to explore. And so from the very beginning, I imagined this as a story about these movements, but told from the perspective of a teenage girl. And by the way, I should apologize if you're hearing my baby cry. I don't know if it's coming through on the mic or not. I have a 7-week-old baby who's my wife is taking care of her upstairs and also putting our 4-year-old to bed. So I apologize if we hear any child cacophony at any point. But anyway, so I imagined a teenage girl sitting in her church basement. That was how this story initially came to me, while this vote was happening. A girl who was closeted and knew that she would be risking everything if anyone in her family were to find out the truth about her, because she's part of this movement that is working to overturn gay rights and believes that that is, an important and godly thing to be doing. So I imagine this is the story of Tammy, and then it became a story of Tammy and also Sharon, another teenage girl who lives in San Francisco. And Sharon, the other narrator of the story, her brother is gay, but she is the only one who knows. She also lives in a very conservative community, and they believe that if anyone, especially their mother, were to find out that he's gay, that would be the end of his life as they know it. And so these two girls, Sharon and Tammy, get paired as pen pals, and they both have these secrets. And at first, they are very, very afraid to open up to each other and risk revealing any of these things that could be so damaging if they were known in their beliefs anyway. And over the course of the story, as they get to know each other, it sort of changes everything about their lives. But because Sharon is in San Francisco, she has access to this political movement that's starting, and this social movement as well, because obviously San Francisco, especially in the late 70s, that was sort of the dawn of like the Castro district of gay people starting to live their lives in an open way that people could see, and politicizing their right to exist basically at the same time. So that's where Music from Another World originally came from. Was I wanted to explore the tension there and look at how it would affect the lives of these two teenage girls. So one thing that I always get asked about as a writer of historical fiction is what kind of research I do and whether or not it's fun and what the weirdest stuff that I come across in my research. So I wanted to show a couple of the books that I used for research when I was working on this, because there were a lot. This was, I wouldn't say this was fun, but so this is the Anita Bryant story. This is one of many memoirs that Anita Bryant wrote during her life. This one came out in 1977. And I think this is an original copy. I had to find it. I had to really look for this in a online used bookstore. It took me a while to find a way to get it. And it, I think she must have written it herself, even though it's a memoir, because I don't think she was a ghostwriter, because it's really, really bad. The writing is really, really terrible. And so it seems to have been published originally by like a religious, I don't know if you can see, there's like this is called Spire Books is the imprint name up here. So it must have been some sort of religious imprint. And it looks like it was originally priced at $1.95, but this copy that I have at some point got reduced to 99 cents. There's a sticker on the cover. I don't know. I think I paid like $2 or $3 for it. But it is really disturbing to read but it was really helpful for me because it talks all about like what her community was like. And so that her church community that led to this anti-gay movement being founded and her role in it. And so it was helpful for me in figuring out like what Tammy's community was going to be like that she's living in. A lot more fun to read was this one. If you can see, this is The Mayor of Castro Street. This is a biography, the first biography of Harvey Milk. Written by Randy Schultz and published in 1987. And it's about more than just Harvey Milk, though. It's really about like the life in San Francisco and like the burgeoning gay rights movement, and it sort of just chronicles it sort of through the through line is the life of Harvey Milk, who tragically was murdered in 1978. This book is, unlike the Anita Bryant book, this book is still in print. So this was not hard to find at all, but you'll see that this copy is very well thumbed and has, but that's because I carried it around in my backpack for a year while I was writing this book. And I think it got rained on. I probably spilled tea on it, and my daughter might have used it for baseball at some point. But so this was a lot more fun to read. Randy Schultz, the author, was an amazing author. He also wrote In the Band Played On. So if you're interested in checking out any historical nonfiction about the gay rights movement, I highly recommend this and all of his books. And while I am talking about books I looked at for research, I will also show another one just because it's fun. So one thing I haven't mentioned in terms of what this book is about, it's set against the backdrop of the gay rights movement, of course, but it's also set against the development of the punk music scene in San Francisco, which was like one of the early sites of a lot of punk bands came out of San Francisco starting in 1978 especially. And so this book is a book of photographs by a photographer named Jim Jacoy, specifically of the punk movement in 1978 to 1980 in LA and San Francisco. And so when I was working on getting to know the characters for this book and stuff like that, I would look through this. You can see it's got a ton of bookmarks of pages that I flagged because pictures on these pages made me think of the characters in this book. But so it's got pictures like these. And so this really helps me to get to know these characters because I knew that both Sharon and Tammy, they both sort of found the punk scene, which was a new thing at the time, as a way of sort of finding a way to rebel, which was a new idea for both of them. And punk music and going to punk shows was a big way that they learned how to sort of interact with the world in a totally new way. So I've got lots of awesome pictures in here that I used. Because this was a time when you couldn't just go to Hot Topic and buy fake punk clothes. You had to go to thrift stores and sort of put your own look together, and it was all about sticking it to the man and whatnot. Here, I love this one. There's another character in the book who I kept having, who's a punk singer, who's a figure on the scene, and I kept having to describe her outfits. And this book was extremely useful to me, give me tons of ideas for how to go with that. But anyway, so that's some background on the book and how it came to be and the research that I did for it. But I see we have some questions that have been coming in. So Leah, I don't know if this is a good time to go ahead and switch to taking questions or not.
Yeah, it's a great time. So thank you so much, Robin. I guess now we're going to move into our question and answer portion of the evening. So it's still time if you'd like to add any more questions in the ask a question fields or check them out and vote on any that you really want to make sure get answered. And also it's a good opportunity to still push that green button if you want to purchase any books. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to go through the questions. I'm going to read them aloud and Rob will have opportunity to answer them. So you ready?
Ready.
Okay. So one question a lot of people really want answered. This one's from Abby. She says, I absolutely adore the way you write queer characters interacting in historical worlds, specifically pulp and music from another world. Do you plan on writing another historical fiction novel in the future?
Thanks, Abby. And probably, to be honest, right now my head is very much in a contemporary story that I have just finished up. But odds are I will. I just have to, if anybody has any suggestions for eras you'd like to see me explore, let me know. It's really fun to come up with new eras because I get to both live in them for a while when I'm writing about them, but also learn about them. I love doing research and learning about more stuff. So yes, Abby or anybody else. In fact, feel free to put that in your ask a question. If you have any suggestions for me on what historical kinds of stories you'd like to see from me moving forward, that would be awesome. I could crowdsource this.
Yeah, I can always add those in the comments.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next one is from Megan. And she asks, could you talk about the limitations and any freedoms of writing through letters and diary entries?
Yeah, it's more limitations than freedoms, honestly. I had always wanted to write an epistolary story that is told through letters and diary entries, but it is tricky, and I will say that it's especially tricky writing historical format because when I was writing the actual letters, I had to take into account how long it takes the mail to get back and forth. And like what time of day my characters would be going to the mailbox, or in some cases like driving to the post office in order to get their letters in the mail in order for times to turn around. And this was especially tricky because I was going with actual historical events in the timeline. Like there were a number of like key votes and key political events that happened in real life that I was working around. And so I had to have my characters have written to each other and like done whatever they needed to do to make the plot work, and for the letters to get back and forth to each other in time for it all to reach the recipient in time for the historical events to take place. So it was a challenge. It was a big challenge because, like, you know, it's if you're writing it today, it'd be an email format, and that would be easier in that way because I wouldn't have to be worried about this time lag. But I'm like, okay, it's going to take 2 days for the mail to get from San Francisco to Orange County, and I had to factor that in with figuring out how this is all going to work. So that was one challenge. Another challenge was just style-wise, figuring out exactly how much a character would realistically write in a letter to somebody else, as opposed to just having a narrative where they're like describing a conversation, for example. So that was a tricky thing that I had to work with. I had to figure out the right tone because you want it to be engaging to somebody who's sitting and reading the book, but at the same time you want it to be realistic in terms of like what would you actually put in a letter to a pen pal. And same thing with the diary entry. Like, you know, somebody might write in their diary entry in like the same way that, you know, you might read a traditional narrative novel, but they also might not. And I had to figure out how to balance those tone needs with like the actual like storytelling needs that I had. So as opposed to what were the freedoms of writing a book that was told in this way, it was really fun to explore the characters' voices in this way, it's different than writing, you know, a typical novel where it's either first person or third person. People do express themselves differently in writing than they do if they're just sort of narrating a story within their own heads. And that was a really fun like exercise for me as a writer to like explore the different ways that they might be expressing themselves in that format. So that was an interesting question. I haven't actually thought about a lot of those things before.
Thank you. Now we're going to take one from Virginia. She asked, how do you pick the time period that you choose to write in?
Well, it really, a lot of it, as I mentioned, comes with what time periods am I interested in learning more about. And it's also, since I write specifically about LGBT characters who are somewhere on the LGBT spectrum, and I write about teenagers, I have to take, one thing that I consider when I'm deciding what to write about is what was life like for LGBT people at this time. So like I wrote Pulp, for example, which was my last book, and that one's half historical and half contemporary, and that the historical half is set in 1955. And that was a time when to be LGBT almost universally meant to be closeted. So that was something that I took into account. I was like, okay, do I want to write about a character who's 100% closeted and doesn't really have any other choices? And that it's a fascinating time period to explore. It's also, you know, it's kind of wrenching, and as a writer, I have to spend time in that world, and it can be very, you know, upsetting to me to spend time in a world like that was reality for the people who lived through it. And versus writing about 1977 and 78, when for my characters, coming out they did not perceive coming out to be an option. But for a lot of other people, especially adults who are not living under their parents' domain, it was an option, and it was starting to become an option for the very first time. And it would have a huge impact on their lives, but it was something that people were still doing. It was the very beginning of like, you know, the coming out movement. And so it's fascinating to think about that. And so as someone who focuses on characters who are LGBT, that is a huge part of it. So if I'm going to write about any era before the 1960s, I have to really think about like how the closet is going to like play this dominant role. And it's tricky. There are positives and negatives to all of it. I've thought about, I experimented with writing a book set in the 90s, which is whole other thing where there was another like sort of turning point. And teenagers started to consider the option of coming out in much greater numbers than they ever had before. So that's another era that's interesting to explore, in that it's a lot like, much more like today than any of these other historical eras, but it is still very, very different, and people are coming at it in a very, very different way. And it can be hard and I also have to think about how today's teenagers, who are my like primary audience, how they relate to it, and how would a teenager relate to reading about this era. So that is a very long-winded way of saying there are a lot of factors that go into deciding what era I'm going to write about. But it's my number one thing, honestly, is like, what am I interested in spending a lot of time researching? Because you spend so much time when you're writing historical fiction, like with your research materials. So it has to be something that I really am passionate about exploring and learning more about and conveying in the story.
Thank you. So I guess we're going to take another one. This one's from Heidi. And she asks, so why punk music, and more specifically, Patti Smith?
Thanks, Heidi. So I guess Heidi has read the book. Because Patti Smith is sort of the muse for both of the characters. Patti Smith, for anybody who's not familiar, is a punk singer, or she's a rock singer who was part of the punk movement in the 70s. She's done a lot of other things, both before and since then. And she is kind of known as, I think I once read her described as like punk rock's poet laureate. She's almost known as a writer as much as she is as a performer. Her lyrics are beautiful and like mesmerizing. And she was someone who I was exposed to when I was a teenager. She had a lot of albums that just had many, many albums. I don't even know how many albums she's had out. But her first album with her band was called Horses. And it came out right around the time that this book begins. And the songs on this album are incredible. And if you just sit and listen to them, and it helps if you read the lyrics, but it's the kind of thing that you can imagine easily getting in your head and staying there and having this profound effect. So she's someone who I first listened to as a teenager, and so she's definitely stuck with me. And when I started thinking about this era and looking at like what was going on in San Francisco in 1977 and 78, I realized this is also in addition to being the dawn of the modern gay rights political movement, it was also the dawn of like punk music in this part of the United States. And I thought it'd be fascinating to have my characters be interacting with that music, because it's such, obviously punk is very much an art form based on rebellion. And my characters are just now starting to like think about whether they could ever consider rebelling against the very conventional upbringings that they've both had. And I could easily see Patti Smith's music being something that would affect both of them in a really profound way. The other thing that I realized when I started looking into this more and researching like what it was like to listen to Patti Smith in the 70s is that the other thing that started around this time is that Saturday Night Live had its first season. And Saturday Night Live is something that now is very mainstream, but at the time, Saturday Night Live was like very edgy and like considered like, really radical. And Patti Smith performed with her band on the first season of SNL on Easter Sunday. In fact, it was like just after midnight on Easter Sunday, she went on with her band and performed 2 songs. And one of the songs was Gloria off the Horses album. And the very first line of the song, which is also the very first line of her performance on SNL, is "Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine," which is a line that, by the way, I couldn't quote in the book because it's copyrighted, but I can say it here. And I imagine Tammy like watching Saturday Night Live, which would be totally illicit, and seeing this person who she's never seen before. The other thing about Patti Smith is that she, at this time, had this very androgynous look about her that was very unusual for a woman at this time. And she also had this very growly voice. It was almost kind of masculine. And so I could imagine Tammy like watching this and hearing her sing that lyric and like having this like androgynous look to her, and just I could imagine Tammy just being completely blown away by like the fact that this woman existed and the fact that she has the nerve to go on TV and sing this song, and it happens to be Easter Sunday. And I could easily see that just having like this major like emotional impact on her. So that's where I wound up deciding to make Patti Smith like sort of have this major role in both of these characters, like psyches and punk music as a whole as well.
Awesome, thank you.
And by the way, everybody should go. You can Google it. It's on Vimeo, I think. Just Google Patti Smith on SNL, and you can watch it. You'll see what I mean. Just imagine yourself as like a 16-year-old in the 70s, like watching this and having never seen anything like it, and try to think about what that would be like.
Yeah, I just recently actually watched it before this, and it really. Anyway, our next one is from Rose. Have you ever been tempted to cross over 2 or more of your books? Or would you say they all exist in their own private universes?
So I wrote a book called Our Own Private Universe. So that's that joke. So I kind of think that my books mostly do exist in kind of a shared universe. I've thrown in a few references every now and then. It's not something that like I've made a concerted effort to do, because like I wrote one book that has ghosts in it and like is a little bit paranormal. It's called As I Descended. None of my other books have ghosts in them. So to some degree, they kind of can't all cross over. But like I definitely think that most of them have something in common with the others. I think there's a reference in Music from Another World to like a bar that's also referenced in Pulp. And there are references, I think there's a reference in As I Descended to like the town where Lies We Tell Ourselves takes place. So I've thrown in a few things. Oh, and there's also a character at the end of Pulp who appears in the epilogue to Pulp, who is the main character from another one of my books that I guess I shouldn't say because I know I'm giving away every single Easter egg that I've ever written. But so I do throw in things, but they tend to be very small. I'm not good enough at like managing worlds to like do like a Sarah Dessen level, like characters making cameos in other books and stuff like that. But in my head, like just on a purely geeky level, I often do think about like, you know, my characters sort of existing in the same world as the other characters. And like, it's been 4 years, so what is this character doing with their lives? And could my other character bump into them but not know who they are and stuff like that? But thank you for that question. No one's ever actually asked me that before. So it's fun to get to talk about it on a geeky level.
Awesome. Our next one's from Colette, and asks, what books and authors influence your work? And what are you reading now?
Well, what am I reading now? Right now, I am rereading The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau Banks by E. Lockhart, which I've read a bunch of times, and I am reading it again because I love the way she does her voice. And I'm also reading Like a Love Story. I'm terrible. I can't remember the author's name. You don't happen to know, do you, Leah?
I want to say I should know too, and now I'm having a blank, and I'm usually like an encyclopedia.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I should have looked at this because
I'm good.
But anyway, it's an amazing. So Like a Love Story, I'll just do a plug for it since I can't remember the author's name. That's wonderful. It is also queer historical, 20th century queer historical, and it is set in 1989. It's young adult, I should say, and it is about. It's set in New York City during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And it follows 3 teenagers who are engaging with it in various ways. There's one who's a like openly gay teenager who is involved. He and his best friend are involved in ACT UP, which was the most vocal protest movement trying to secure healthcare for people with AIDS and other forms of recognition. And then there's also a character who is closeted and recently immigrated from Iran. And it's fascinating and it's really funny and it's got tons of stuff about Madonna in addition to, you know, so don't like, when I say it's set during the AIDS epidemic, it is, but it's not a tragedy. It's a story about these 3 teenagers and navigating the world, and it's really, really cool. So I highly recommend it. But your actual question was, or your first question was, what authors have influenced me? And there are so many. But it's funny because what always comes to mind first and foremost is Aaron Sorkin, the TV writer who did, you know, West Wing and various other things. And I kind of can't stand Aaron Sorkin, like as a human being, but his West Wing was like a formative, like watching the show was a formative experience for me. And I think it definitely influenced like the way that I write dialogue and the way that I think about characters and stuff like that. So that's always what I think of first. There are tons of YA authors though, too, who have had a big influence on me. I mentioned E. Lockhart, but also Melinda Lowe and many, many other awesome authors. There's another one that I'm drawing a blank. I'm not drawing a blank on her, but E.M. Danforth's book, Miseducation of Cameron Post, had a big impact on me. And the recent movie adaptation is incredible, by the way. If you haven't seen that, check it out. I'm sure it's on various streaming services. But there's been a lot.
Awesome, thank you. And our next one is from Ray and Jean.
Oh, they're my parents. Hi.
Does Sharon agree with Tammy on the gay rights issue?
Have you not read the book yet, Mom? Yes, Sharon agrees with Tammy that she supports gay rights. Thank you for the question as well.
Thank you. And our next one is from Miranda.
Hi, Miranda.
If you could eat dinner with 3 people alive or deceased, who would they be?
Okay.
That dinner party question.
Dinner party question. So, okay, here's the thing. I never have a good answer for the dinner party question because I have so many complicated feelings about which historical figures and stuff like that I'd like to sit with. So, like we were just talking earlier about J.K. Rowling and how she'd be an interesting person to talk to, but I'm also like, well, but now she's like a TERF. So here's how I'm going to answer Miranda's question. So I'm pretty sure this is Miranda Keneally, who is a friend of mine. Yes, it is Miranda Keneally. She is a fellow author, and she's someone who I actually really enjoy having dinner with. And so I will say that in this time of social distancing, I would love to have dinner with my writer friends again. We haven't gotten to do that in a long time. So I would love to have dinner with Miranda and some of our other writer friends.
Awesome. I'm going to skip around, and the next one I'm going to do is from Jarrett. Have you thought about placing a story during the suffragette movement or the 19th century?
Okay, thank you, Jarrett, for giving suggestions. I have thought about the suffragette movement, actually, in a fair amount of detail, and I think it would be really hard, but it would be really fascinating. I think it would be a lot of work to do the research. Yes, I think that would be a really interesting era to explore, and that actually is on my list. The 19th century is a trickier time because, again, being not only would any queer teenage girl be super duper closeted in the 19th century, there's a very good chance that she would have zero idea that she even was queer because there would just be no context for it, there'd be no role models. And so you get into a tricky situation. So that would be hard to figure out. But I think it would be a fun challenge. I did write a story set in the 18th century in the All Out anthology edited by Sandra Mitchell, which is an awesome, awesome anthology of queer historical fiction by different YA authors. And the story that I wrote in that is set in 1726 at Kensington Palace. And it's kind of almost like a Regency romance kind of setting, even though it's not the Regency period, but it's close to it. And it was a romance between 2 servant girls at a palace. And that was really fun, but it was almost like a fantasy level kind of story because it's just such a difficult era in which to be queer. You're risking so much more than you're risking in modern times. And again, there are so few role models and there's so little to work with. That being said, Sarah Waters totally has done it a lot of times and done very, very well with it. So if she can do it, I should be able to as well. So yes, I should look at that. That would be a challenge, would be a fun challenge to explore.
Thank you. I feel like this would be a good kind of follow-up deeper into that one. So we'll go to Lauren's question. In relation to writing historical fiction, having watched Gentleman Jack and learned about Anne Lister and Anne Walker, do you think you would delve into lesbian queer history as far back as the 1800s, or would it be similar to what you said?
Well, here I have to admit that I haven't watched Gentleman Jack. I'm terrible. I have little kids, and so I very rarely get to watch TV. But I'm familiar with Anne Lister's story, of course, and I've seen the trailers for Gentleman Jack, and it looks awesome. It looks like it's sort of taken a different kind of approach to queer history, where it's not trying to be straight up realistic. It looks like it's got a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek element to it. I hope I'm characterizing it right, not having actually watched the whole thing. But yeah, I think that would be interesting to explore. To do it in that kind of way would be pretty fun. That was something that, again, to talk about the Sandra Mitchell anthology again, All Out. That is fascinating reading through that and looking at different eras. There's a story in there that's about set in I guess it's the 15th century. It's a Robin Hood retelling with a transgender Robin Hood. There's a lot of older stuff that there's room to explore and to look at in different ways. So yeah, it could be really fun to look at going farther back, pre-20th century, and figuring out how to look at those eras and figuring out an interesting way to package it and tell it. It'd be different than the kind of historical fiction I've written so far, though, because what I've done so far has been much more on completely realistic side of things. So it'd be a different way of approaching it, but I think it'd be really fun.
Okay, we'll take a few more. So this one kind of goes back to talking about the book. So this one's from Clara. What was your inspiration for this book?
So the inspiration really was, in this case, the historical era, and wanting to look at the history that went back to the gay rights movement as it stood in the late 70s, and like thinking about in this case, I started thinking about the era first, and then the character immediately came to me, starting with the character of Tammy and looking at her perspective, and then the character of Sharon sort of organically unfolded from there. When I thought was just to write about Tammy and her experience. And I was originally thinking that she'd live in Florida, not in California, because I knew that Florida was where Anita Bryant was operating. But then as I did more reading, I decided to move things over to the West Coast and look at how the conservative movements formed in Orange County, because I learned that Orange County was kind of, in some ways, the birthplace of like the modern fundamentalist movement. So that's where it came from. It really came from the history in this case. But once I had the characters in my head, it grew very much from there. It grew out of them and their personalities and the way they interacted with each other and their families and the other people around them.
Awesome. This one also comes from Colette. If you could have a pen pal with anyone living or otherwise, who would it be?
Okay, I'm going to cheat on this question. We were talking, Leah and I were talking before this official event started, and I was looking at the questions, and I was thinking, and I saw that one, and I said, oh my gosh, that's a really hard question. I don't actually know the answer to who I would choose as a pen pal for anyone living or dead. And then it was Leah who had the idea, and I'm going to steal her answer. Margaret Wise Brown, who is the author of Goodnight Moon, among many other children's classics. I read her stuff all the time to my 4-year-old. But she was also queer, and she had a fascinating life. And, you know, there's much more to her than you would ever think just based on reading Goodnight Moon, even if you've read it 1,000 times, like a lot of us have. So she's somebody who I would love to, you know, talk to and find out like her perspective on the world. I think that would be really, really cool. So thank you, Leah, for that idea.
And our next one is from Rose again. Shares that my mom, a high school librarian, is watching this with me. She wants to know if you think LGBTQ plus is the best genre for your books, or if you want them advertised as historical, realistic, or etc., in hope to reach a wider audience.
Oh gosh, so it's hard. I wish I could like talk to Rose and find out more about her mom's high school library and how it's organized and stuff like that. That's the frustrating thing about this format. I would totally go back and forth and ask for more detail. But anyway, so if you're talking about what shelf to actually physically put my books on, assuming you only have one copy, then oh gosh, it's hard. But I would probably say the LGBTQ shelf, because I just know that if you're a teenager and you are looking for books about LGBTQ characters, having a shelf like that is amazing. I didn't have a shelf like that in my high school library. I wish I had, or in the public library for that matter, when I was a teenager. So I think that is exciting. On the other hand, there's like 2 other hands to this, right? There's lots of hands. I don't know, getting into like a Fiddler on the Roof Tevye situation, like how many hands do I have to make this work? But if you're looking at getting a wider readership, then yes, there's definitely value in going onto the shelf with like contemporary romances, for example, for like my book, Our Own Private Universe, which is just a straight up contemporary romance between 2 girls. If you put it on a shelf with other contemporary YA romances, then somebody who is reading like Sarah Dessen might also be interested in reading my book and seeing that, you know, there's no reason why a romance between 2 girls should be treated any differently than a romance between a boy and a girl. And then same thing with historical fiction. Then on the other hand, there's also the kids who are closeted, or the kids who are terrified to pick up a book about a character who's somewhere under the LGBTQ spectrum. And that kid might not be comfortable going into the section of the library that has a big LGBTQ label in it, or rainbows on the spines, or what have you. And so I want my books to reach those kids. But I definitely want my books to reach those kids. So it's a very tricky thing. those kids might only be comfortable walking into the historical section or the contemporary section or whatever. And those same kids might also have trouble if the cover of a book is very clearly about, makes it very clear that the book is about characters who are LGBT, which is kind of the case with this Music from Another World cover. I'll hold it up in case anybody doesn't have it memorized like I do. Like, this is kind of in that category. You could maybe make a case that this is a book about straight people, but it'd be tough, depending on like how closely you're looking. And I have that issue with some of my other books too, that like there's one, again, the book Our Private Universe has two girls kissing on the cover. Like no one's going to be able to pick that book up and take it home if they're afraid that somebody will see it and that it could risk outing them or that it could risk getting them in trouble in some other way. And I don't have the answer to any of these questions. So that's why I have trouble telling your mom at the librarian, like, I think it depends on the community, honestly. There are some communities where you can work under the assumption that a large portion of kids who identify as LGBTQ are out. Like, you know your students far better than I do, of course. And so that could be a factor in your decision. And it could also be that like kids have come up and told you or told their teachers or told each other, I don't see why like books about people like me should be in their own shelf. Like, why should they be off there when they should be mixed in with all the other books? So like, I guess it totally depends on like the specific audience. That would be the best answer I could give to like how to shelve books like these. So I'm sorry, I know that doesn't really help.
No.
What I can do.
So I just want to shout out Virginia's comment that, just so you know, Like a Love Story is by Abdi Nazemian.
Thank you.
So everybody check it out. And we have a lot of other great comments. I just want to end with a question that I had to. Was really loving this. I was wondering, what are you working on next? Next big project or what you're starting to write? Anything coming up in the works?
I can tell you, I'm not supposed to tell you, but I'm going to. I haven't officially announced this book yet, but this is an arc for my next book coming out in December, hopefully. The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre. This is another contemporary setting book. As you can tell from the illustrated cover, it's much lighter than in the other world. This one is set in the world of high school musical theater. And it is about a girl, Mel, that's the main character there. She is the stage manager for her high school theater. And as is true for some people who work on the technical side of theater, she thinks that actors are all ridiculous and she doesn't want anything to do with them. And so then, of course, she is working on the spring musical, which is Les Miserables, and she falls in love with the girl playing Fantine, who's right there. But she has a love curse on her, so it's a problem. There's a lot of problems involved here. So that is my next book. I'm not supposed to have told you about it yet, so please don't tell anybody else. The book will be officially announced at some point in the near future. Right now, I'm only supposed to be talking about Music from Another World because, it just came out today. But so that is my next big project, and I'm really excited about it because it was really fun to do the research. Like, not that reading Anita Bryant's memoir wasn't fun for research, but to research this one, I got to go watch a bunch of high school musicals, and like a lot of my friends came with me to watch a lot of them, and it was really, really fun. I also got to watch a lot of YouTube performances of Les Miserables, which was also fun. And so that book was just kind of a joy to write, and so I'm excited for it to be coming out. But again, don't tell anybody else.
Okay, that's and just one last rapid fire question, just to end with the book in honor of Music from Another World. If you were making a playlist to go with this book, what would be the top song on your playlist or mixtape?
Oh gosh, well, I'm gonna go back to what I said before. Patti Smith's Gloria, the first song on her Horses album, would absolutely be the number one. That would be absolutely be how the playlist would kick off. I totally have a whole list somewhere of all the music that is mentioned in the book. It is a very music, obviously it's in the title, but it's a very music heavy book. There's a ton of music in there. There's punk, but there's also like the more mainstream music from the time. There's like, it's all music that I listened to on the classic rock station when I was in high school. So there's like Tom Petty, and there's Journey, and there's the Grateful Dead, who were apparently mainstream in 1977, and all sorts of other. There's like there's a chapter where the characters spend the entire chapter listening to Pink Floyd, The Dark Side of the Moon. So it would be an extensive playlist. I think one of the people who was on the blog tour actually made a playlist for the book, or somebody did, that I need to go and check out because there's a lot to it. Oh, and my UK readers are very into the fact that there's also references to David Bowie. So there's David Bowie, who's like Sharon's brother's favorite. So there would be a lot to it. It'd be kind of varied, but a very fun like time travel playlist to listen to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any last words before we start wrapping up? Thank you all so much for your great questions.
Yeah, thank you all. These questions have been awesome. But also, once again, I will just say thank you so much to Politics and Prose. I can't believe they've put together this amazing program in just the past couple of weeks since they've been shut down. And like they're all still working, even though everybody is, like everybody's shut up and like a lot of people are not working anymore. They're still turning books out and packing them up and shipping them out to people. So please definitely support Politics and Prose and buy the book from them. There's the button right down there. So, and thank you so much for having me and for having all these authors and, continuing to put books out into the world, even in the midst of all the chaos that's going on.
Yes. Thank you so much again for joining us this evening, Robin, and braving this new platform as we're trying new things. As Robin said, once again, don't forget to hit that buy button. And also check out all of her other titles, like our own private universe, all of her other titles. Remember, we have free shipping until April 15th again. And also take advantage of that if puzzles everybody's doing that. And also, of course, thank you all viewers for joining us tonight. It's your support that keeps us going in this time like this, and we hope you continue to shop online and attend our other digital events just like this one. You can click our follow button, follow Politics and Prose in Crowdcast, so you can get up to date on all of our other upcoming events, both adult and our kids and teen events. We have our updated listings. Also, you can follow us on our social media platforms. We have a specific kids and teen one, which is at Kids and Prose, for updates and all of our fun stuff. But of course, I hope once again to see you all again in our next one, and keep reading widely. Have a great evening. Thank you all so much.
Bye.